Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Divorce Unplugged podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Nicole Cox, and you might know me as the family law liaison on socials.
Hi, everybody. Keegan Burke. You may know me as Divorceology on all the socials. My disclaimer is not a lawyer, not lawyering, not legal advice, not giving you legal advice. Here, having an open conversation with Nicole about all things divorce, custody, and separation.
Yes. My disclaimer, I am an attorney. I am not yours. I'm certainly not giving you legal advice. And we're just here to try to help you guys understand what's going on with our conversation.
Yeah. Today, we're going to talk about red flags. And you are perfectly dressed in red.
I am. I thought we were doing a little bit of a holiday episode, everyone, but here I am in red. So here we go.
So, red flags. Let's talk about. I think that there are probably some phases of red flags and how they play a role in relationship mapping, divorce, separation, and what they are indicative of, and why it's important to the things that we talk about. And the reason I say that is, lots of people think that high conflict behavior starts after separation, and it doesn't, right? The red flags generally were there in some capacity, and we all are guilty of ignoring them. Um, and they pop up during stress, during parenting, various things. And so divorce doesn't necessarily create conflict. It ultimately magnifies it. So being aware of red flags is a really important part, both in your marriage that could lead to divorce, when divorce happens and during separation. So today we're going to get into it. And so let's talk about a couple things in your mind. Like, let's start with what do we tend to miss as red flags before filing for divorce, right? So, and when I ask that question, let me put the context behind it. What are red flags that would indicate generally a problem for you in divorce proceedings, right? So, what are the red flags that happen during your marriage that you didn't, or any marriage, right? Um, During the marriage that would indicate that you'll have problems in divorce that you may not be aware of?
Gosh, I think there's so many. And then I think we start looking at even before that, which are what are the red flags in dating, right? And I mean, seriously, because people typically don't change that much. I would say like very controlling behavior, an inability to, and this is just what I've found from working with my clients, the whole collective, right?
Sure.
Is,
Yeah.
yeah, is really controlling behaviors. I would say jealousy can be an indicator, and also an inability to communicate and to regulate one's emotions.
Yeah, I think that's good. Things that jump out at me are constant crisis, right? So always meltdown, always chaos, always needing stabilization. You pointed to entitlement or control, right? So double standards, rules for thee, not for me. That's pretty clear that they're going to try to control post separation and be a problem in divorce proceedings. Um, to me, victim identity, right? The Every boss, every ex, every family member, every person has wronged them, right? Well, you're now going to be on that list of people that have wronged them. So
Oh
keep
my
that in
gosh, it is so true. If you think about somebody talking about their crazy ex,
mind.
you have to think to yourself, hmm, well, were you the crazy one? I mean, because
Sure.
the
Yeah.
victimization, right?
Yeah. Bad faith arguing, right? So what does that mean? It means like constantly moving goalposts. So you might be in a disagreement, and in one breath it's over here, and then it's over there. It's kind of like, well, I don't even know what I'm arguing about anymore. Typical manipulation tactic.
Right. How about just picking a fight for no reason?
Mm,
Just get their own way to do something.
yeah, that's manufactured chaos. They have to be in
Mhm.
chaos, a state of chaos all the time. This is another one that is sort of subtle, but it's a pretty good indicator, and that is suing or filing complaints about others. Always filing a complaint, always complaining, maybe being a big litigator. So suing companies or bosses or landlords or whatever it might be. That's a pretty telltale sign that you're going to have some challenges ahead in your divorce proceedings.
That's an interesting one. I don't see that often with my clients, maybe with their co-parent, but it's one
Mhm.
that I will definitely ask my clients about moving forward.
And then I think the other one is a completely different personality in public versus in private, right? We all kind of are a little bit different public to private, but like when there are
The
very
facade.
clear traits that change from one to
Mhm.
the next, right?
Right. I have a client that definitely struggles with that with the person that she's divorcing and the person she has to co-parent with. It's like he's just a different person to everybody else.
Sure.
But
Yeah,
all the evidence and the recordings say different.
totally. Totally. So, as part of this, right, another kind of realm of red flags, um, same question. And there's probably some overlap here, but red flags that predict abuse, and I would also say, kind of the counter to me would be red flags that would predict abuse allegations, right? So, um, there's two threads here, right? What are some of the red flags that a person needs to be vigilant on that would indicate they could be in a risky or abusive situation? And then for the guys, generally, that are have the risk of being accused of abuse, what are some of the red flags that you need to be paying attention to ensure you aren't on the hook for a false allegation in divorce?
Yeah, so that's interesting, Keegan, because of course, I think by now our viewers and our listeners, our whole audience knows that I typically coach women.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so for me, when I am talking to one of my clients, I mean, big, huge red flags are obviously a jealousy piece. Okay. Jealousy is a big one. Control. I will say another interesting one, and you might not agree with this, but if my clients are the major like breadwinners in the situation in the marriage, then they're going to be very controlling, and in many cases there's abuse involved, there's physical, there's emotional. I know that that financial piece might be a surprise to you, but I do see it as a bit of a red flag. And then and substance abuse can also
Mhm.
be a red flag.
Yeah, I think substance abuse is a big one. And for from my perspective, right, the red flags that predict or at least raise the hairs on my back as it relates to making sure that, hey, like you could have a great relationship, you could love the person, but things you need to be aware of that if it doesn't work out and you're going to separate, what are things that would are really pretty good indicators that you're going to get hit with an allegation of abuse, whether you have abused the person or not. Things that jump out for me, dramatic. Now, again, women tend to be emotional in general. They're emotional creatures. Totally
Now,
fine.
not
Expected.
they were over emotional.
No, I'm not saying I didn't say over. I said they're emotional creatures. Right?
And
We all are.
you guys are just missing a sensitivity chip.
Fair enough. But overreacting and then, accusatory behavior based on that emotional reaction, right? In an everyday argument. That's kind of like, okay, that's problematic. Um, Lying, exaggerating, selective truth in an argument, right? So picking and choosing certain elements of the story or the situation, always concerning from a false allegation of abuse indicator.
Okay.
Um, for me, this one stands out, and this is a preemptive victim positioning. So let me give you an example. Let's say you are in a relationship and you're not abusive whatsoever. You're a stand-up individual, and the other person says, without any evidence, without any experience, that they're scared of you, or you scared me, or I'm scared of you during an everyday argument. Maybe it's you didn't, I don't know, sweep the front porch or take the trash out, right? In an argument where there's no violence and the person states that they're scared of you, that to me is you need to clock that, keep that in the back of your mind. That's narrative control, that's programming, and that's a very real risk. Keep in the back of your mind from an abusive allegation standpoint. And again, this goes in the box of you're not abusing anybody. Maybe there are some arguments in a household, but really there's no abuse. If somebody's starting to talk scared, fear, you need to clock it and you need to
So,
start getting your ducks in a row.
right. So are you saying that that's an indication that somebody's going to start to
Yeah, if you get into
fall
divorce,
for
you can
it?
pretty much you can almost guarantee, put your money on red, red flag, that
Right.
you're going to get hit with false allegations of abuse for sure. Other things, right? History of false storytelling, right? So
Mhm.
this tends to come up more in dating, right? So they did X or they were doing Y or they've done Z, and you're kind of in that lustful kind of like new age experience, and you're not really ever testing what story was told. And 5 years later, you meet the friend or you go, wait, that whole thing that she was talking about or he was talking about didn't even
Never
happen.
happened. Okay, so now you have a really good one in dating. Okay, so now we're going way back. But like you do have to pick that out. When you hear over and over that somebody's telling you a story and they never actually did that, they were never in that situation, and I could go into it in ad nauseum, and everybody else is looking at you saying, that person never did that. That is a huge red flag. You need to know that lying on that level is very frightening. That is a
Yeah.
huge red flag.
Yeah, I have some tales of the road scenarios where there have been people that have pictures and text messages of, while they're dating, oh, I'm snowboarding or I'm horseback riding, and the
God.
person ended up getting the original or the picture, and the metadata is from like 3 years prior. It wasn't that day or week. They weren't snowboarding. The picture's from a year prior, but that's the story they're telling the person in their dating process. Just
Oh,
wild, wild stuff.
oh, I have seen some wild stuff. My clients have told me some crazy stories, in particular about someone who lied about playing on a specific team and never did. And I was like, well, that's really easily looked up.
Hmm.
So I was like, well, why did you get with that person and have a child, since that was the one red flag, all that lying,
Yep,
which is now happening in court?
yep, yep. So, I think it's important to recognize red flags, right? Both in your marriage, in your relationship, in a perfect world, you're identifying them in dating, and in a perfect world, you are recognizing them and turning around and running in the other direction versus ignoring them, moving forward and getting yourself into a situation that you wish you hadn't. Um, but I think the reality is a lot of people ignore red flags leading up to it. And so let's say you've done all that and you get into separation. Now we've got red flags that show up after separation that are, you know, there are phases of separation, right? Immediate, it could have been, kind of like an emergency situation. It could have been, working towards that. But things jump out at you that you should be aware of just as it comes along and how to plan around it and what to expect. So, in your mind, what are some things that immediately present themselves that tell you as a coach that, okay, my client is going to experience some problems because the other side is doing what that's a red flag post separation?
Well, I know that this is a red flag for anything, but I can tell you it's going to be a high conflict situation. And I have this with several of my clients, so this is why I'm saying it. And it may not be your experience, but when one parent is actually trying to like interfere with the other parent's parenting, or to say, oh, your mommy doesn't love you, or your mommy's not doing this, or your mommy needs to say sorry to me. Those are huge red flags that we're going to be in court for 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, or telling the children to call the other side by their first name, or
Oh, yeah.
your mommy or daddy doesn't love you, or
Yes.
uh, mommy or daddy's house is broken so that they don't want to go there, or inserting, language of violence, like anything that it does interfere or manipulates the minds of
Mhm.
the children is, you need to be very precise in the way you behave. in the way you respond, and I would say in the way you document and manage the time with your children through and through, right? Whether it's
Absolutely.
witnesses, whether it's monitors, whatever it is, right? Really being on your game in that regard. And I have, so you nailed it, right? Weaponizing or gatekeeping or interfering, it's
Mhm.
all kind of in that basket. Um, I have manipulating activities, so like scheduling overlaps. It's an easy way. It's a very passive
Um,
aggressive way to,
on
you know,
purpose.
create problems and conflict or control. Sports, I'm a huge advocate for sports, but I know that parents will use sports as a mechanism to kind of interfere with the other parent or control the situation, whether it's picking a sport or whether it's picking a sport that conflicts with the parenting time, right? People do that all the time. Um, so that's one. The other one too that jumps out that is pretty easy to identify is communication chaos, right? The parent that just bombards the other with noise, almost like that. It's almost like that red flag that I was saying. Narrative control in an argument, right? You're like 1 second it's here, 1 second it's there. It's that same kind of narrative in a text message where everything's a problem, everything's a chaos, everything's an accusation. You're signing up for, or you've got a very difficult case ahead of you. Because remember, most people, once they separate, they treat their communications as evidence because it is in some form or fashion, but they also think because they wrote it down, it makes it a fact, right? So
Right.
they write things to memorialize stuff that didn't even happen, right? So keep an eye out for that. If they're summarizing something and it's not true or it's missing context or there's a vague accusation there, take that, go have the evidence aligned with it, be prepared to protect against it.
Which is where I was going to go when you're swapping the narrative or you're twisting the narrative around when they're only using the bits and pieces that are convenient to make them look good.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and it's buzzwords, right? Danger, fear, concern, injuries, and it's a fine line. We talk about it all the time, or have, and it's like you want to communicate transparently and effectively, right? So that's being forward about it. Right? That's the
Mhm.
best, that's the best parenting. But you also don't want to over communicate, and you ultimately only need to respond to the things that require response. So
Where I was going. Stick to the needs and the development of the children and don't talk about all the other stuff.
that's right. That's right. And then two, the other one is again, I think this is interesting because it lands on the abuse side, right? If you separate and there's never been an allegation of abuse and all of a sudden one pops up, right? That's twofold. One, is it real? And I would say that if that is the case, it may not be. And so I have a problem with that because it negates the validity of those that are abused. And then the flip side of that is if it's false and you're the recipient of that false allegation or that newly kind of popped up DV allegation, then you need to make sure that you are preparing yourself for what's to come in your family court situation where you're going to have to defend against DV arguments. Um, which, by the way, just a side note, we need to go back to the whole DV and abuse thing just as a soul, keep that in the back of our hat for future episodes. There's just that topic alone could go on. We could have 50 episodes on it. But in that vein, right? Sudden DV allegations you need to be very aware of.
Hmm. Absolutely, I understand. I mean, if there's not a pattern, then there's a possibility. And we never want to say that somebody's not being abused if they're saying they are, because a lot of time women won't report it. So if they're suddenly reporting it, that could be a red flag.
Yep. Yep. And then in closing, right? So how do you how would you recommend because there again we just talked about different phases of red flags, right? How would you recommend generally to respond to these red flags, right? Like, um, what are things that are general practices that help you manage the red flags that pop up pre-divorce, after divorce, considerative abuse, all those things, right? What jumps out to you?
Right, I was thinking of that too, like, okay, so we have all these red flags, but what do we do about them, and how are we going to try to reduce the harm, so to speak, or be proactive? And I would say it's always good, I think, to get some type of a therapist or a third party involved for help in the very beginning when you see red flags, so that maybe you can work on them as a couple, or even peacefully mediate and peacefully co-parent. If you can't do that, then you really have to be able to manage yourself. Like, you have to keep yourself in line
Mhm.
and not get overly emotional and not get sucked into the loop, is what I think. So keep very mindful about the way you communicate with the co-parent, and don't overly communicate.
Yeah. I think you and I agree in almost all facets there. And so the way I kind of chalk it up or would be in the three phases we just talked about, right? If you're in a relationship with the person, you stop arguing with them immediately, right? It's you go into kind of damage control mode. Everything now is documentation, making sure that your behavior is on point, even in the relationship. You want to be aware that, hey, if divorce is coming, these are the things that I can expect will be problematic when divorce happens, right? So,
Mhm.
in to put it simply, start preparing, right? Even hopefully you can work it out, but if you can't, you want to be prepared. And then you said it right, emotionally, right? Get out of the emotional dynamic, that ebb and flow, right? No more reacting. You don't over explain, right? You're not participating in the games that the other side is playing.
Mhm.
Right? You're just clocking it, right? You don't need to defend yourself on every topic. Um, and then I think the other one I really like post separation is non-negotiable boundaries. So,
Okay.
for example, right, like if there's a court order, it's you're not leaving any of the emotion or the ambiguity or well, I had a good day or she had a good day or he had a good day or a bad day. It's I follow the court
Mhm.
order
Right.
for today. I'm following the court order. You want to talk about it for tomorrow? Let's do it in a setting that makes sense, right? Um, Setting yourself from an availability standpoint. I'm available X and Y. That's it. If it doesn't fit into that, then that's not your problem. Um, Communication platforms, right? Being consistent. I think generally consistency is probably the underlying foundation for all of this. And the best course of action, in my opinion, is kind of start early, build a timeline, right? Like it doesn't have to be this Bible summary of your relationship, throughout, during, after, so on. Bullet points, jot notes, keep tabs on where you sit, identify your red flags, and if things pop up that align with those, just be considerate of them, because you never know when that dragon will rear its head, and hopefully it doesn't. But um, we've seen it too many times that it has, and so those that are doing these things stand the best chance to kind of make it through the process, not unscathed, but better than others.
Yeah, better than others is still better. Because it can get ugly, unfortunately. I've seen it with all my clients.
Yeah. So my closing point is because listen, I'm sure I have red flags. I'm sure you have red flags, right? I don't think red flags make people bad. So that's certainly not the message we're trying to deliver. But I think red flags can be and are predictable, right? So they are indicative of certain things to expect. It's not black and white, but it is something that, people ignore and they shouldn't. And so I would say the sooner you can start recognizing them, accepting them, and managing around them, you're creating a certain level of control and power in your scenario. And as far as I'm concerned, predictability is power, right? It is your sanity.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much I have to say on red flags. I think that sometimes people can get too caught up, especially if you're still in a relationship, in red flags. I think you can definitely keep tabs and document when you're in the family court system and understand if you're just getting into it, that these are the red flags and this is probably some things that you're going to face in court.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. That's a great catch because I do want to be clear. I'm not saying you get into a relationship and you're just sitting there, jotting notes about, hey, I married this person and we're 3 months in and these three red flags have popped up and I ignored them and now I'm gonna write them down. No, no. I mean like you are very quickly progressing towards the family court system. You know, just start putting them on the radar. That's a great point. So,
Yeah.
all right.
I,
Well, until next time, like, listen, subscribe, do all the things. We thank you all for listening and appreciate the time.
yes. And happy holidays, everyone. We're coming up on a new year. Thank you all for listening and viewing, and we will see you soon.
Yeah.